This conference marks the launch of a year of celebration and a year of commemoration. This is the 20th anniversary, 2018 will be the 20th anniversary of the founding of our human rights program here at the University of Dayton. It's the 10th anniversary of our undergraduate degree in human rights. It's the 5th anniversary of the founding of the Human Rights Center. 2018 also marks the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the 70th anniversary of Gandhi's assassination, the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's and Robert Kennedy's assassinations. I want to close by reiterating that the need for sharing ideas, assessing and improving through self-reflection and critique, engaging in meaningful and effective action to make real improvements in the lives of the poor and the persecuted is great, very great today. And that's really why we are here. Before I introduce our opening speaker, Mr. Dobson, I want to thank a few of the folks who have made this possible. Our president, University President Eric Spina, Provost Benson, Vice President Horner, Dean Pierce, Associate Dean Don Pear, the Dayton Council on World Affairs, Marquise, the Dayton International Peace Museum, Abolition Ohio, all our other campus partners, our Human Rights Center Executive Committee, the staff and the students, Monty and Jeanette, and our great conference coordinator, Yusuf Farhat, who worked tirelessly for months putting all this together. It really wouldn't have happened without him. Can we give them all a round of applause for a moment? So that wasn't too long. I'm going to transition now. Next up is Will Dobson. He'll offer remarks really to open up the conference this year. He's the senior supervising editor of NPR's International Desk. He's worked at Slate, Foreign Affairs, Newsweek, Foreign Policy, many other places. His articles have appeared in the Post, the Times, Wall Street Journal, and many others. He gave a great lecture last night as part of the University of Dayton Speakers Series on the learning curve of dictators. He spoke of how skilled both authoritarian rulers and those who oppose them have become over the past decade or two. It was a very insightful and fascinating talk, and I'm very happy to invite him up to the stage to open the conference. Thank you.
Good morning. Well, it's a pleasure to be here this morning and to join you to help kick off a conference that I'm sure is going to channel many essential conversations at what I think probably for many of us feels like an essential moment. Now, I should probably begin with just a couple of disclaimers. I am not a human rights expert. I am not an expert on any of the things that many of you are and that you'll be addressing over the next couple days. I have not embarked on very close and careful research of migrants or modern day slavery or the obstacles or pathways necessarily to peace, things that many of you are looking at on a regular basis. I do oversee coverage of all those topics though. So to some degree, we are engaged in just that work all the time, and we do it in large part with the help of human rights activists and human rights experts, people who are really steeped in this field. And we are, I think there actually are a tremendous number of linkages really between the work that many of you do and the work that the people that you are researching do, and journalists such as myself. You know, at some, for us, this community represent sources. In fact, it's still early in the morning, and I've already been on a call this morning where we were discussing an assignment that someone's going to embark on in the next 2 days in South Asia, and the assignment would not be happening at all, but for the help of human rights activists that we contacted who gave us sort of essential information that will allow us to pursue a story that we've been trying to pursue for months and have not been able to make any headway on. But because of that help that we just received yesterday, we'll be able to go forward with this story and hopefully air it next week. And so it's really, it's one of the most fundamental partnerships that we have among a community of possible sources and outlets for information. In my own work, when I was working on my book, human rights activists were on speed dial for me. They were people that I was talking to in one country after another. And I'd say that there's another way that I feel like there's a real commonality right now is that I can't speak for the human rights community, but I would imagine that there is a feeling at this moment in time that their work is absolutely critical and essential. That is certainly how it is felt right now, I can say, among journalists, that journalists feel as though that at a moment when basic facts are being questioned on such a regular basis, there is an element to our work that feels even maybe a little bit more vital than it has in the past. And so I think there too, perhaps we share something in common. And then also, maybe the most fundamentally and constant is that we're both engaged in the task of asking questions. We are asking questions all the time. We are trying to ferret out information and facts about how our world is changing, and then taking that and trying to construct stories that we feel need to be told. One of maybe the greatest aspects for me personally of working at a place like NPR is that we actually have a large enough footprint around the world. We have bureaus around the world so that we don't just have to chase the stories that are in the headlines. That's important. We're a news organization. We cover the news. But I'm as focused on the correspondents who are not on the main story of the day, because they're the ones who now have the time and the possibility of finding stories that no one else will find, to going to the places where no one else is looking. I think we have to be really mindful in our own coverage to those blind spots and not just chase the bright, shiny thing that is in front of us and demands immediate attention. It's critical, but you really have to be working in both gears. And I think it's probably much the same in your own work. For myself, where in my own work, just as a journalist, where I have sort of crossed over the most in the human rights space has really been, and I talked about this a little bit last night, has been reporting on people power movements around the world, which often have a human rights or a civil society component to it. And sometimes these have been broad movements, sometimes not. Sometimes they're localized and maybe they are representative of something that's brewing. It's starting with students. It's starting with an activist community, maybe a religious community, maybe workers. And when I'm looking at these as possible stories, when I'm looking at these as possible areas, avenues for investigation, there are a lot of questions that sort of come up for me. And I think what it boils down to is, to some degree, you're trying to discern what, to put it bluntly, what matters. What is genuine and significant and growing and perhaps representative of something larger afoot in a place. And so, because sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it is a byproduct of just the push and pull of everyday life. It's resentment, it's anger, it's discontent, and that matters, but it may remain at a slow boil, and it may not be the next thing that really brings about wider, more significant change. And I want to have my antenna up for those things. And so for those types of things, I'm asking myself questions like, fundamentally, is this movement nonviolent? I asked that question not because I wouldn't not cover it if it was violent, we would, but I asked that question because we know from research that it's much more likely to have a significant impact and to have long-lasting legs if it has a nonviolent component to it, if it's a nonviolent movement. Is it disciplined and well-organized? Is this a movement that is thinking through a strategy? Are they creative? To what degree are they capable of keeping those that they oppose off their footing? Have they fashioned a message that is appealing and compelling to a larger group than themselves? How do they handle failure? That's critical. Maybe one of the most important things is whether or not a group actually learns from its mistakes, if it's accumulating knowledge or not. Again, I see this happening in multiple spheres of sort of non-governmental life, if you will, whether it be the civil society groups in Egypt, or student movements in Venezuela, or workers' movements in Brazil, or what have you. And at the end of the day, we want to find stories that can communicate these ideas and will, frankly, grab people in our audience and grab their attention and make them focus and understand something about the world beyond their own backyard. Now, you don't need to be in the news business right now to know that the world appears to be a relatively fraught place. The news and the outrages of the day seem relentless. They certainly do to us. And I think many people feel beset by challenges on many fronts. Again, I can't speak from experience, but I assume that would be true in many of the communities that you work in and in the work that you do. Certainly, I think journalists and human rights activists appear to increasingly be at risk and to increasingly be under fire. Now, last night I spoke a little bit about this moment and how it may seem to some, I think it does, to feel like an inflection point of sorts or a possible crossroads. For me, what I'm struggling with is trying to discern among all of this fluidity and change, what here is fleeting and what here actually could be enduring or have lasting effect. I find that to be a very difficult thing to sort of categorize, in part because of the pace, and maybe in the long view it'll end up being cumulative in some ways. But I think that in many of the sort of institutions and norms and understandings that we have had, both nationally and internationally, are up for grabs. And part of, I think, our challenge, and maybe yours too, is to try to discern that difference. What is damage? What is a detour? What is short-lived? What will linger? I do think it's important to think along these lines, not just from the point of view of substance and not just in the point of view of informing our work, whether it be journalistic or research or otherwise, but I think it's also important to take the long view and remind ourselves that history has not ever moved in some linear progression. We do that because it's both informs what we do, and I think we do that also because it's sustaining. If you don't, then it's very easy to become discouraged. It's very easy to become overwhelmed by the moment and not actually see in the longer view the tremendous progress that is being made. Because that progress, I think, is real and has been real over a long period of time, and a set of months I don't think necessarily can change that. But again, that's the question. To what degree are we experiencing something that is passing, or are we experiencing a new normal? And so I wanted to raise that just because I do think it's vital. I think it's vital on so many fronts. And as you continue your work, whether it be pushing us to understand, research, or offering new ideas and approaches that can push our frontiers of understanding what is possible and what needs to be done. I hope you'll keep that in mind because it is vital that people stay at what they're doing. I worry very much about the attrition in the ranks of journalists and sustaining them in their work. It's never, at least, I don't want to say it's unprecedented because I don't know that, but I know that in the careers and lives as many of the people I work with, it is unprecedented for them. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you for what you're doing and the work you're doing. And I'm sure that this is going to be the beginning of a great conversation over the next couple of days. Thank you.